Hello everyone, welcome to another live hangout here at Voice Essentials. So good to be spending the next 45-50 minutes with you talking voice. And today we've got a really special subject, a special guest that I'm going to introduce you to, Nadine Manion, just in a moment. Yeah, just wanted to jump in and get the show rolling. Today is, I've been really looking forward to today's show. It's a show I have wanted to do, a subject I've wanted to, deep dive into probably for the last couple of years. And I've been waiting for the right person to invite onto the show to talk about it. We are talking today about transgender voice. Now, I know that this is a subject, and in fact, for the last number of months here on the show, we've been sort of doing some prep works, getting ready for today's show, and because this is a very sensitive topic that, for the want of a better way of describing it, involves working with a rather vulnerable group. And I want you to know that if you are a part of the transgender community, that we are so pleased, and me in particular, but the Voice Essentials community, we're so pleased that you are joining us and watching in on today's show. And I'm so hoping that our discussion today will be so helpful and encouraging to you, so that you know that in regards to the development of your voice, you do not have to walk the journey alone. There are people like myself, like Nadine, our special guest today, who are super keen to walk alongside you and support you in your journey. And so for those of you who are watching the show, who are not necessarily a part of the transgender community, just want to lay out a few really quick ground rules, and then we're going to dive in. The first is that, as I said, this can be a rather sensitive subject, not only for those from within the transgender community, but also for those from without who, for whatever reason, it may be for religious reasons, it may be for experiential reasons. There is a multiplicity of reasons why this might be a difficult subject for you. If that is the case, I want to encourage you, feel free to, you can just not watch. And I want you to watch today with a sense of that this is going to be a really positive experience, a real learning experience, and one that is a safe space for everyone, not just those within the transgender community, but also those from without. And so just be mindful of that. We do have a live chat going, as you can see, I always get that wrong, going down this side. The live chat will be active throughout today's show. Linda, our moderator, Linda and I have talked about this show at length, and we decided to leave the live chat active. However, Linda, we are, as far as, comments that we would deem to be negative, derogatory, trolling, we would normally delete or block. But today's show in particular, we are going to shoot first and ask questions later. And so Linda has my full support that Linda will delete and block anyone without blinking in today's chat where we feel that the comments are unnecessary and headed in the wrong direction. Just want you to be all very aware about that as we dive into today's show, because as I said, this is going to be a really positive show, and we want to keep it that way. Okay, so with all of those sort of little house rules out of the way, let's dive in and introduce our guest for today straight after this.
Sound check. Check 1, check 2.
Hello, Nadine.
Hi.
So good to have you on the show. As I said in the intro there, I have been really looking forward to having someone like yourself that is really passionate about this area come onto the show. And you and I have known each other. How long have we known each other now? Quite a few.
I think we first met almost 8 years ago now.
It's a little while.
It was a while ago, yeah.
It's a little while. We met through, obviously, a group called ANATS, the Australian National Association for Teachers of Singing. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, I believe I actually came to a presentation that you were doing for ANATS.
Okay.
And it was a business presentation. So
Was
I
it?
remember coming and speaking to you after and thanking you for it, because I really loved how open and generous you were as a presenter. So,
that's very kind.
yes, but I was just a wee young thing.
You're still a wee young thing. You are now the New South Wales chapter president of ANATS, are you not?
Yes, I've stuck with ANATS this whole time. So still loving my ANATS time.
Good, very good. And you, I mean, just so people can kind of know where you're coming from and some of your background, just tell us a bit more, because you've got your finger in a number of different pies.
Yeah, so I'm based in Sydney, so I've been in Sydney for about 5 years or so, and was on the Central Coast before that. And my pronouns are she and her, and I work as a contemporary voice teacher. So I've got a special interest in vocal health and also transgender singing voice as well. Currently teach at JMC Academy as a contemporary voice lecturer. I do a bit of research at Griffith, and I'm studying my speech pathology degree, so just can't sit still, it seems.
You cannot. So
No.
the studying the speech pathology, I was not aware of the fact that you were doing that. So very good, very good. Yeah, so there's so much that you're getting into, but of course a big focus of your work to date, so more recently, is transgender voice. Can you just share a little bit about how it is that you came to be interested in this area of research?
Yeah, I think it started just circumstantially. I was teaching at a studio on the Central Coast about 8 years ago now, and I had a client that came to me who was a trans female client who was looking to train a more of a stereotypically feminine sound. And so I looked into the research and resources that was there so that I could support her, and found that there really just wasn't very much out there, and what did exist was highly anecdotal. So since then I've just spent a lot of time trying to keep up with the research, and it's got a lot better. The past, say, 5 years, we're starting to get some really good stuff coming out, but I really wanted to be a part of the solution and not be waiting for other people to do it. So that's kind of what got me started in that area and in that research. And the more that I've worked with the trans community, the more it's been a growing experience for me. It's made me change the way I think about singing in general. And that's been a really exciting thing for me as a teacher. Yeah,
I think it's interesting to hear you talk about, it's in the last 5 years that there's been a growing sort of, the research is getting better and there's more people doing work in this field. Because it was actually 5 years ago, while I was in Stockholm for the International Congress of Voice Teachers, that I actually went to sat in on one of the talks that was focused on transgender voice, and it really piqued my interest in the field myself. And I had worked with transgender singers prior to that, but really was fascinated by the very intentional work that is going on in this field. It's really, I think one of the things that really got mentioned quite strongly actually as a part of that talk, which was kind of off to the side subject wise, but was pronouns. I just want to very quickly talk to the fact that you identified your pronouns as she and her. I identify my pronouns as he and him. Just talk to us a little bit about the importance of the use of those pronouns, if you could, Nadine.
Yeah, I think pronouns, we previously called them preferred pronouns, so they're now just referred to as pronouns. We don't use that terminology anymore. But introducing your pronouns is a really great way of basically telling people that it's a safe space for them to introduce their pronouns. So I try and always introduce my pronouns to everyone, whether I think they are trans or cisgender, because that's not for me to know.
Yeah.
To get in the habit of doing that all the time. And when somebody then gives you their pronouns, using their pronouns, it's a really good way of respecting somebody and saying, I see you for who you are and that I respect that. So it really starts this great relationship with people off the bat. And it takes about 5 seconds to say it.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a really great habit for everyone to get into if you can. And it's really great that I see that you've started including pronouns in the titles, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I actually saw, I don't know if you caught it, but there's an episode within the most recent generation of Star Trek called Star Trek Discovery. And they introduce the use of pronouns in one of the episodes. It was fabulous, and I say it was fabulous as a person that doesn't typically exist in the transgender community. So I'm hoping it was fabulous for that community also. We are starting to see this, you know, just flow into the natural flow of everyday life, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the really great thing is I haven't caught that Star Trek episode yet, but I'm in lockdown in Sydney, so I've got a lot of time I can put on my list of TV to watch.
Yeah.
I think the great thing is that the fact that it's there, even if it's not in a perfect form, it opens up a discussion. And so I think even if it's on Star Trek and maybe the trans community feels it could have been done in a better way, it starts us actually talking about the best ways to do things like that, which is only a positive thing and it only moves us forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is all about the moving forward. And I think it is important for us to, to recognize that, in the world of research, as we've identified, that there's, in the area of voice research, 5 years, and there's been research going on from before 5 years ago. That's certainly the case, but there is a growing groundswell of people really delving into this space. But of course, with this is the case in pretty much every field of voice research, we are learning so much. And voice research moves at such a quick pace. Part of the challenge of being a vocal instructor in the 21st century is keeping up with the developments of understanding. Nowhere more so is this the case than in this particular field of transgender voice research. And so I guess we probably do need to make a really key point that whilst what we're discussing today may be our clearest understanding of what we know now, in 5 years' time, you and I might look back on this video and go, what were we thinking? We know differently. And so it is important that, we contextualize our discussion in the chronological sort of framework of 2021 and what we know. What do you think are the main, the main things that we kind of want to tackle first in this discussion and this idea around working with transgender voice or working as a transgender person with my voice?
Look, I think the first thing that's really important when working with trans voices is to really set the standard that every person is unique. So I think when a lot of the research on trans voice first came out, it was a little bit of taking a whole community and saying this is what they want, which you know, we know, as you've said many times, everyone's an individual, every singer's an individual, and we need to treat them as such. So I think it's really important to start off with that understanding that every singer is going to want a different sound. Just because somebody identifies as transmasculine doesn't mean they want to sound like Barry White. I couldn't think of a better example then. So there's your old school example. You know, and not every trans feminine person is going to want to sound like Katy Perry.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good starting place to actually make sure we're really aware of the goals of individual singers. And also, I guess, for a trans singer to actually spend some time thinking about what their goals are. So listening to models, listening to other singers, and really finding what they actually like in those voices so they know what they're aiming for when they are building their voice up.
Yeah, because the journey is so unique to each individual. And, you know, it's no different for any singer, is it? I mean, the journey of developing one's voice, I think that's such a key point for everyone, is think about how are you wanting to express? How are you wanting to allow your voice to identify you? And, you know, I think one of the challenges I know in working with transgender voices in the past myself is because our voice is so directly connected to our psyche. You know, it is the representation of who we are. That is why this is such an important area, is because we are wanting the individual to be able to express themselves in a true and authentic way to how they exist. And so, but of course, with transgender voice, that journey has complexities, and the complexities are different whether we're trans male or trans female. I wonder if you can talk us through the differences, and we're of course going to be quite generalized in our conversation today, but I wonder if you could just step us through the challenges that would face the singer who wants to be trans male or the singer who wants to be trans female.
So I guess the biggest challenge is that when we're born, we're all born with an individual instrument, and we can train those instruments to do fantastic and wonderful things, but generally those instruments are predisposed to certain things. So certain people are born with a body that is more likely to be a gymnast than a weightlifter, and vice versa. And I see voices as really similar to that. So depending...
We've only got to be watching the Olympics at the moment to see.
I know.
And in fact, my family were talking about you can really see the different body types, can't you? In different sports. Yeah. You know, your weightlifter does not look like a gymnast. And yet they are all wonderful athletes. Anyway, side point.
Yeah, no, you're very true. And that's not to say that someone who has a body designed to be a weightlifter couldn't be a really great gymnast.
Yeah.
It's just saying that there's kind of strengths in the way that we're born and the way we're all put together. So if somebody is, say, presumed female at birth and identifies as transmasculine, if they want to change their sound to sound closer to a cisgender male voice, which is someone whose gender identity aligns with the gender they were presumed at birth, then they're in some ways working against what was given to them when they were born. So that doesn't mean that's impossible. It just means that they're having to kind of think outside of the box a little bit into getting to that same end result. And so a lot of people end up using things such as hormone therapy, which can directly influence the voice, speech therapy, so working with a speech therapist, and there are also vocal surgeries that people often turn to as well.
Yeah.
Although they're a bit cost prohibitive sometimes.
Yeah, in some ways, and I want to be really careful in the way I say this. In some ways, the journey of transmasculine is a little easier from a physiological point of view than trans feminine, because with hormones we can bring about growth in the larynge, which brings about a deepening of the fundamental pitch, and yet a heightening of fundamental pitch is a more complex process. What are your thoughts around the different directions that we might go in that?
Yeah, you're right, because it's tricky, because it is easier in some respects and much more difficult in some respects.
Yes, absolutely.
So what we do know is that if a trans masculine person chooses to undergo hormone therapy, and keep in mind, not every trans masculine person will want to do that.
Yep.
So if they choose to undergo that, we actually know that it has a direct influence on the larynx. So the ways that we administer hormone therapy, the dosages and people's responses are incredibly varied, and we can see that in the research.
Yeah.
So some people find they are on testosterone and their voice actually doesn't drop in pitch. So it's not as common, but that happens as well. So when people do take those testosterone, the things we do know in general is that it causes the vocal folds to get thicker, but it doesn't actually influence the larynx or the vocal tract.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, so because we've got a small larynx and that can't get any bigger, the vocal folds can get thicker, but they can't lengthen, so they can't get any longer, which presents different difficulties in itself. So it's not a matter of taking the hormone and getting a completely cisgender male larynx. There's something kind of in between, which gives a little bit of a different timbre or tone than a cisgender male voice may have. If you listen to a lot of the trans male singers out there, it's actually a really beautiful sound. And I always say to my clients, everyone's desperately looking for uniqueness in their voice. I'm desperately looking to be unique and make a sound that other people aren't making. So it's actually really fantastic that there are these sounds that are so unique and beautiful coming out of going through the transmasculine hormone therapy.
And of course, one of the reasons why one person may choose not to and another person may choose to undergo the hormone therapy is because my current knowledge is that once we bring about that change, you can't reverse that change, and so that is a permanent change to the voice. That's still the current understanding.
Yeah, so the general rule is once something's grown, you can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
Except in surgery.
Yeah.
But I think there's also, and this is something I actually had to learn as a cisgender person when I started working with the trans community.
Let's just qualify your use of the term cisgender.
Yes. So cisgender is just meaning that the gender that I was assumed at birth, female, aligns with the gender that I am. Yeah. So it's the inverse of transgender.
Yeah. Good. Just helping people.
So,
yep.
No,
Sorry.
that's a good clarification.
Keep going.
So I think one of the big things I had to learn was that there is no right or wrong way to be trans, and there are numerous different ways to be trans. So if somebody chooses to not undergo hormone therapy and still have quite a high sounding voice, that might just be because that's how they feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And I think that was something I really had to get into my mind, was that it's not necessarily either male or female and fitting into that binary. There are people who just play across the two. Yeah. Which is a fantastic freedom to have vocally, I think.
Yeah, it is. Now, I just want to recognise Linda, our wonderful moderator, has put in a super chat. And we do always try to answer super chats, even when it's from our moderator. And she's paying it forward for Sunrise 93. Now, the Sunrise has asked a question, so I want to sort of inject this question in here. Where's a good start to start singing like a female? Sunrise is transitioning from male. my range is G2 to F sharp 5. I was born male, so what would be range when becoming a woman, when a tenor become an alto or soprano? I'm 28.
Okay, so I think, just to clarify the question, you're asking basically the change in range or the difference in sound?
Let's answer both. Let's give them let's give Sunrise 93 a double bang for their buck. Well, in this case,
Sure.
we're giving Linda a double bang for a buck, but yes.
Sure. Look, thank you firstly for that question. That's a pretty impressive range already, I'm just going to say. So you're obviously doing something right.
G2 to F sharp 5. You're not too shabby. That's right.
Yeah, I know. So as a contemporary teacher, I think it's a little bit different because I don't necessarily adhere to the structure of alto, mezzo, soprano in the same way that a classical teacher might. Generally, what we know to be perceived as female range, so the lower edge of female range is E3. So, and that was actually done in a speaking sense. So that study was done more in speech, but it's kind of a good thing to think about that anything below E3 is not always perceived as feminine. It may be perceived more in that non-binary, non-gendered area. So range-wise, that's, if your aim is to sound very feminine, that's probably a good goal to start with. I think one of the biggest things with changing the sound is, while pitch is important, it's often the other elements that actually really create a feminine or masculine sound. So my voice is relatively low, but the way that I'm using my vocal tract and various things also really impacts whether it sounds feminine or masculine. So I would definitely recommend looking at things such as the larynx position. So a higher larynx is generally perceived as more feminine, and a lower larynx generally more masculine. And mouth shape makes a really big difference too. So the slightly pulled back lips of like an E sound tends to give us a lighter quality, which is more associated with a feminine sound, and a more pulled forward lip of, say, an oo with elongating the vocal tract tends to be perceived as more masculine.
Yeah, absolutely. What about some of the psychogenic influences in the way the user use pitch in how we display gender?
I guess, so in speech or in singing?
Take your pick.
Just in general. Yeah, so I think particularly in speech, which is where we tend to see a difference in the way men and women use voices. I'm not an expert on this, I'll just preface this. But we do know that women speak quite differently. So things like rising inflection is quite common in women, whereas we don't hear that as much in more masculine voices. Speaking a little bit faster is more common in women, as you can probably tell by the way I'm speaking now. So lots of little things like that. Joiner words, such as the ums or likes, are a lot more common in female voices. So, and using hand gestures. So there's a lot of other elements beyond how the voice actually sounds in the way that we use it, that really gives that perception of femininity or masculinity.
Yeah. What do you find so in a lot of the work that I dare say you do and the work I have done, though I'm almost certain that I've done less work than yourself with transgender singers, what do you find are the key health issues vocally that the transgender voice needs to be aware of? Because we talk a lot here on the channel about vocal health and the importance of it. If you don't have a voice, you can't sing. But if you don't have a healthy voice, it makes it more difficult to sing, I should say. So what do you find are the key, the standout areas that someone in the trans community would need to be cognizant of around the health of their voice?
I think in general, one of the things that we see more in, well, I won't say more, a lot in the trans community, particularly for those people who are working on changing their voice, is hyperfunction. So where the voice is working a little bit too hard to create the sound that people want. So we see it a lot in trans masculine voices where people are pushing their voice really low.
Yeah.
And we also see it in trans feminine voices where people are able to get a high sound but are struggling to maintain that, so they go into a hyperfunction in that sense.
Yeah.
I think that's something to be really aware of, because particularly for people who are pushing their voice to do something that it maybe wasn't born to do, which is really what we're all doing as singers, aren't we? I think vocal hygiene becomes very, very important.
Yeah.
So things like drinking enough water, not smoking, all those kind of housekeeping things become really important.
Yeah.
So that when we do have those moments of hyperfunction or the voice struggling a little bit to do something, the ramifications aren't as big.
Yeah.
And we don't get into that habit. So I think that's a really general thing that we see. One thing we do know with hormones, so when people do testosterone therapy, there is something called entrapped vocality, which I think Alexandros Constantis came up with. And it basically is when the vocal folds being so big in a small larynx, we end up getting singers that are constantly hoarse.
Interesting.
So indefinitely hoarse. And it's pretty rare, and I believe that he only saw it in people who started testosterone therapy over the age of 50, so it's more likely to happen with age. But that is something that we're aware of with testosterone therapy as well.
I was not aware of that. Can you mention the name of that again?
It's by Alexandros Constantis, and it's called Entrapped Vocality.
Entrapped Vocality. What a fabulous
Yes.
descriptive term.
Yeah, so it used to be, I think if you Google it, it's Entrapped FTM Vocality, which is female to male, but that's an older term, so
Okay.
we're not really using that moving forward.
Yeah.
Just snipped out the middle bit.
Yeah.
I'm sure Alexandros won't mind.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it comes back to a lot of the standard care points. What about vocal rest? You know, when we are in that hyperfunction use, what role do you find that vocal rest plays?
In my opinion, I will preface it with that, I'm not a huge fan of elongated vocal rest.
So I'll just clarify for you. So when we talk about vocal rest, we identify relative rest as opposed to absolute rest. Yeah. I too am not a fan of absolute rest, in so much as absolute rest may be indicated by a laryngologist post-surgery for a short period of time. The most recent research would suggest that certainly nothing ever longer than a week, and even those time frames are getting shorter, it would appear. Let's talk about relative rest, where we're giving the voice some downtime between use of our usual manner.
Yeah, look, I think particularly with trans feminine voices, I think rest is really important, so that momentary downtime. So there's a lot of people that suggest interval training is really important for trans feminine voices. And that's basically...
Just clarify that, yeah.
Yeah, so even as little as 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off can actually be really great for avoiding that hyperfunction, particularly when you're working in extreme parts of your voice. So if you're singing a line, you might sing that and then just stop for 5 seconds and then sing that line again. And I think for one, it means that we don't get caught in that hyperfunction stage, but it's also really good for us to feel the difference between between rest and things being neutral, and what you're actually doing. So it becomes much more obvious when you're pushing your voice too far, if you have to go to rest for a second and then jump back to that same space. So I definitely think it's a great technique to use when you're training your voice in the extremities.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's we've kind of talked about some rather obvious things today, obvious to a certain extent. I want to kind of, just for a brief moment, sensitively talk about something known as binding, and talk about some of the complications that might arise from that, and how someone that is employing binding what they might want to consider in regards to the health of their voice. Do you want to talk to that subject? And maybe you can start off by explaining what binding is for those who don't know.
Yeah, so binding is a form of shapewear. So different people will wear, there's corsets, binding, which is very shapewear, and they can be worn by trans masculine people, so trans men, which is basically something that goes around the chest tissue and it compresses it. So it is done by trans men and also by non-binary people wanting more of a genderless figure. I think the biggest difficulty we run across in binding, and again, I'll say that I'm not an expert in binding in general, one of the biggest difficulties is that there are purpose-built binders out there which are relatively healthy for people to use, but can be quite cost prohibitive, and also a lot of people don't necessarily know where to get those binders. So the difficulty we run into is when people are fashioning their own binders, so wearing swimwear that's a few sizes too small, ace bandages, things like that. Because it basically compresses the rib area, so we don't get much expansion. And if you're trying to expand your ribs when you're singing, you can actually cause injury doing that as well.
And my understanding is this can also be, particularly during pubescent years, if binding is not done in a healthy way, it can bring about maladjustment and malgrowth of certain muscular structures. Have you heard of that aspect of the health of the individual?
Look, not directly to do with kind of pubescent teenagers, but I can imagine that would be the case. You know, there's a lot of difficulties with alignment when people are binding as well. But I guess the really important thing with binding is there's a really legitimate reason that people bind, and it's a really important and a really personal reason. And so as a singing teacher, as a singer, I think it's important to work around the capabilities of what somebody can do within that binder.
Can we use this opportunity again to really encourage, in a really intentionally supportive way, those who are watching today's show, who are perhaps even in the beginning stages of this self-awareness in this area and this commencing this journey, is to, and I know this can be very, very challenging to do, but I want to really encourage people who are on this journey to where at all possible, please seek out support of, people who can come alongside you. And by that, I'm not just talking about your humble singing teacher. I'm actually talking about psychologists, psychiatrists, people who are, even your family doctor, because it is when you are able to be supported by these individuals that they can guide you into the healthy choices on this journey. And it's often when we try to, for example, binding, it might be one example where we try to use implements and tools that may not be fit for purpose. and it really is important that you find yourself with someone who may actually have some knowledge around this area that will lead to really positive and healthy outcomes for you. What have your experience has been, Nadine, in helping to be alongside someone who is, and playing your role as the singing teacher? What do you find your role is in supporting someone in this journey?
I think it's really, the more I think about these kind of things, the more it's just the same for every singer. It's, you know, our job as a teacher is to create safe spaces, because we know people learn best when something is fun and safe and exciting. And so I think it's really important to create those safe spaces, to encourage people to explore their voice within what they're comfortable with. So if somebody doesn't want to sing high, not making them sing high. And I think that's really important, just letting them explore their voice safely, and always positive reinforcement, which is the same for every student that I work with. I think we can't be told enough how beautiful our voices are. And I think it's really important to find beauty, even in mistakes. Even somebody singing the wrong note, I can still go, okay, that note was wrong, but the tone was beautiful right then. So I think that's the same kind of thing. It's meant to be fun, and
Yeah.
I don't think people need to keep being reminded about how different they are.
No.
Because we're all different.
We are all different, and at the end of the day, at the core of every singer is a human being.
Yeah.
And
well put.
Yeah, it's, you know, we're all humans looking to express ourselves with the use of this wonderful gift called voice, and we all do express and use that voice quite differently, and we should be all encouraged along that pathway. We're coming up towards the end of today's show, Nadine. I've so enjoyed our discussion, but all good things must come to an end. And I did say to Wicco is one of our regulars here on the channel, and I think it was last week's show during the Q&A, Wicco asked whether there would be an opportunity to ask a question during our conversation with you. And so I do want to just give Wicco an opportunity to ask their question. I'm going to jump over and read it for us. So Wicco
No worries.
says, Dr. Dan and Nadine, I'll put that in there, is there any way I can get my vocal cords to be more flexible and to be able to sing songs that are in a high key? I'm transgender too. Love this support. So is there a way to get my vocal cords to be more flexible? How would you respond to that, Nadine?
I'd say, obviously, without hearing your voice, I have to speak generally.
So it's always the challenge on the show, Nadine.
Yes. But look, I would say that the best thing about the voice is we really don't know what the voice is capable of, ever. We have science, and we can have all the science in the world, and then there'll be one person who just completely defies everything we think they were capable of in the first place. So I think it's really important to keep that in your mind, that neither I nor Dan can tell you what you're capable of. But I definitely think when exploring range, I know Dan's spoken about this countless times online, the semi-occluded vocal tract exercises are such a safe way of exploring range. So simply going through a straw is fantastic, going up to those high notes but not sustaining them. So I think that's a really good way of gently playing up there, and just doing it in moderation.
Yeah.
So I think the one of the mistakes we make often is trying to do too much too soon.
Yes.
And when something comes out well, we just sing it 20 times in a row. So patience and just any possibility, really, once you kind of put in that work and patience, I think. Yeah,
it's, you know, I think when it comes to range, I often talk about the challenge of if we wanted to learn, if I wanted to learn the splits. Now I'm a man in his late 40s, you know, learning to do the splits, it may well be beyond me, but let's say I wanted to. I would have to be incredibly patient in that process, because stretching not only the muscles but the ligaments, it's going to take time to do that in such a way that I'm able to do it safely. It's the same with exploring range. Range, I love the way that Nadine just then directed us towards the patience of the process and to take time. It's when we try to do things quickly and expect it yesterday that I often find singers can run into problems, because they've kind of tried to drop into the splits when in fact their body's not ready to do that. And you can, you know, I have that visceral response to the sensation of doing that if I chose to, which I have no intention of doing. But hopefully that, you know, that's something you can take away, Wicco, and put into and implement into your own exploration of your range. Nadine, do you have any closing thoughts? Anything that we haven't, you know, touched on that you feel is important that we touch on, or do we leave it there?
Look, I think the thought I'd love to leave you with is actually something that I kind of have learnt over this whole time of working with the trans community, is this gender binary of what voices should and shouldn't be able to do, of what a good bass sounds like, of what a good soprano sounds like. I think that's not only an incorrect approach for the trans community, but for everyone. You know, I feel like it's putting these little barriers on what people believe we should sound like and what we should and shouldn't be capable of. And I really feel that as a singer myself, I've tried to employ that idea of just seeing what my voice is capable of and actually pushing it beyond those boundaries. And I found that's been really rewarding to explore that for myself as well. So I think we can learn a lot about singing from working with trans singers and from the trans community. And that's only going to be beneficial for all of us as well.
Absolutely. Nadine, thank you for coming onto the show and joining me in the discussion around, as we said at the very beginning, you know, what can be a really sensitive topic for some. And I just want to, you know, acknowledge your work in this field, and, you know, I want to encourage you, keep going. We need more, you know, as we identified, we need more research in this space, and you know, it's wonderful that we have someone like yourself in Australia, and a couple of others who are doing such important work in this space. Everyone, if you want to learn more about what Nadine is doing or what have you, check out her website. You can get to it via www. It's actually on the screen right now, nadinemanion.com. And I'm sure you can jump over and email her and engage with her further that way. Well, thanks, Nadine. Thanks for coming onto the show.
Thanks so much for having me and for having such an interesting and important topic.
Yeah, thank you. Well, there you go, everyone. So, oh man, you know, one of the reasons I love having guests onto the show like we do, you know, every few weeks, is because I learn. You know, it's the professional development as a contemporary singing voice specialist, non-clinical singing voice specialist, is never ending, and I have learnt from today's discussion with Nadine, as I hope you have, and I do hope that you feel that we've been able to, you know, tackle this subject sensitively and in a caring and supportive way. If you've enjoyed the show, please hit the thumbs up button, because it really just, you know, it encourages us in what we're doing here in the channel. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to everyone who is being engaged in the live chat. I from what I could see going on, it has just been a wonderfully respectful and positive conversation. So thank you to all of you in the community who have been engaging in that way. Next week we will be back. We will be doing a live Q&A. And maybe you've got more questions that you want to ask about today's show. You can certainly ask them next week. We do the live show every Monday, 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Every second week we just do a straight Q&A. You ask the questions, I provide the answers if I know them. And then, as I said, we regularly have guests on, just like Nadine, people who are experts in their field. So I hope you'll subscribe and join our ever-growing community here at Voice Essentials. I hope you have a great week wherever you are. I want you to stay safe and I want you to keep singing well. I'm Dr. Dan, and as I always say, sing well.